The following message by Alistair Begg is made available by Truth for Life. For more information, visit us online at truthforlife.org.
At the Leisure and Arts page of the Wall Street Journal on Thursday, some of you saw because you read the review of Cream playing at Madison Square Garden. And those of you who didn't know that Cream played guitars, but you thought that Cream was in a jar, don't worry about that. Others can put you right later on. And when I'd finished reading about Eric Clapton and his buddies, I noticed a review of a book directly underneath entitled What the Guru and the Philosopher Can't Tell You. And this is the review of a book by a man by the name of Julian Baggini. The book is called What's It All About? And in the book, he suggests that the meaning of life, answering the question, what is life, is not to be found in any sense of cause. It isn't found, as he says, quotes, in the causal origin of the human race. This, he says, is actually a good thing because it is at best a moot point whether the universe has any purpose at all. The universe, he says, might simply be. And if this is at least a possibility, then he says we want to be able to find a meaning in life that issues from life itself and not from what purposefully gave rise to life. And so almost in keeping with some of the answers that were there in this little video tonight, the writer suggests that what we need in order to make sense of it all is a list of things. And top of that list, top of the list up here, I think, happiness. And he says self-expression, and thirdly, personal relationships. The reviewer, a fellow called Colin McGinn, who himself has written a book called Mind, Sight, Image, Dream, and Meaning, published by Harvard University Press, the reviewer says that from the author's perspective, God is not so much dead as he is irrelevant. And as he draws his review to a close, this is how he writes. The question that remains, not taken up by Mr. Baggini, is whether this kind of deflationary secular answer is enough. Most people will agree with the list he offers and live according to it. But they may still have a nagging feeling that more is required for life to be anything other than a brief and inglorious cosmic bleep. That may be irrational, a kind of pointless overreaching, but it may yet be what the majority of mankind is condemned to feel. I thought that was a fascinating phrase. Most people, he says, will conclude that something more is required for life to be regarded as more than a brief and inglorious cosmic bleep. I've spoken so much recently that I can't remember where I'm repeating myself, but I know for sure I'm repeating myself. And if I quoted last Sunday night from Einstein's Credo, then let me preface it by saying, you remember last Sunday evening when I mentioned Einstein's Credo? I think that's well worthy of repetition. But Einstein in 1932 writes in his Credo, our situation on this earth seems strange. Every one of us appears here involuntarily and uninvited for a short stay without knowing the whys and the wherefores. And of course, whys and wherefores will take some of us of lesser intellectual capacity and less erudite reading to the work of Tony Hatch and to the voice of Petula Clark, because she's the one who said we wander around on our own little cloud and we don't know the whys and the wherefores. So whether you go, if you like, to the pinnacle of intellectualism expressed in Einstein, or whether you go to the common parlance of the everyday life of people who are warned not to sleep in the subway and not to stand in the pouring rain, None of us can deny the fact that this question is a significant question, and it is a question that demands our attention. And I think perhaps you've come this evening because you recognize the validity of that assertion. And here in this little section that I read for you, James' question, you will note, is set within the context of a group of businessmen, if you like, sitting down to make their plans. Jewish men have been well known throughout the years, and the same remains true today, for their peculiar abilities in the world of entrepreneurial skills. And that was true in the time of James, and James is able to say and appeal to their thinking. I know that a group of you often sit down and you gather around a table and you put together a business plan and a strategy for making money that extends beyond the immediate and out perhaps even as far as a year. He says, I want to speak to those of you who are good at doing that. I want to give you a word of warning. I want to suggest to you that you're actually making a tactical error. And what he is condemning here is not, as some people have liked to suggest, because of their political and economic persuasions. What he is condemning here is not business, but boasting. What he is condemning here is not the industrious nature of the quest, but it is that the quest is being engaged in entirely independently of God. What these individuals he addresses are doing, and we can identify with this, I'm sure, if we're honest, is thinking quite ordinarily about matters of life and business. And there are certain assumptions that underpin their choices. For example, they operate on the basis that they'll for sure be here tomorrow, that they'll for sure go there tomorrow, and that they will for sure be successful on the basis of what they do when they get there. That's what they're saying. And that's common thinking. You could argue that that's what makes the whole of the American economy go round. That if it weren't for individuals sitting down in small businesses and large, making those kind of plans, that many of us would be in dire straits. And the progression is straightforward. Today, tomorrow, a year. And from this perspective, a day as it passes is viewed almost like a mark that you could put on a wheel. Do you remember when you were small, you used to take popsicle sticks and stick them in your bike to make it sound as though you had a sort of motorbike, and it made that whirring sound? How pathetic was that? How embarrassing when I think about it. How my parents must have said, what a dimwit. But anyway, there I was, trrrring around the place. And sometimes I came up with all kinds of schemes. I was going to work out how far I was going and how many times it was going round. In order to do that, I marked my wheel. But of course, the faster I went, the less I could see the mark, and the whole thing was a futility in the end. And the perspective from what we read here is the notion that tomorrow is, if you like a mark on the rim of time's wheel. And there is, if you like, the wheel of time which goes round and round and round. Well, you say there's a sense in which that's true. I mean, it's 20 past 7, and in 12 hours it'll be 20 past 7 again. It'll have just moved to a.m., and then 12 hours later it'll be 20 past 7. It'll be 24 hours from now. We understand that. But what is being suggested is something at a far deeper level. And it is challenged by what the Bible says. When I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the lyrics from The Lion King, which I've never seen. But the hit song from The Lion King, I thought I remembered, was entitled The Circle of Life. And so I checked, and it was, and here's how it reads. From the day we arrive on the planet and blinking step into the sun, there's more to see than can ever be seen, more to do than can ever be done. There's far too much to take in here, more to find than can ever be found. But the sun rolling high through the sapphire sky keeps great and small on the endless round. It's the circle of life, and it moves us all. Through despair and hope, through faith and love, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. It's the circle of life, and it moves us all. Through despair and hope, through faith and love, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. Now, what the Bible actually says is that there's no point in putting a mark on a circle because it isn't a circle. But that the passage of time is not ultimately cyclical, but rather it is linear. And that the line goes from eternity to eternity. And any attempt to view life in a cyclical fashion is actually, in some dimension, to seek to escape from the inevitable, strange, insistent knocking at the door of our minds, which says to us, I don't think we're going around. I don't think we're coming around. I think that the first day that I said hello began my last goodbye. I think that from the day of my birth, I am moving inexorably towards the day of my death. Alec Mattia says of this, when we think then in terms of the passage of time, we receive another day, not as a result of natural necessity. Tomorrow does not have to come. Nor by mechanical law, nor by right, nor by the courtesy of nature, but we receive another day by the covenanted mercies of God. That's Lamentations 3, isn't it? It is because of God's mercy that we are not consumed. It is because of His mercy that we awaken to a new day. What is our life? Well, our life is grounded in the gift of God, and every day is a further gift. Now, in this little section, what we discover is that man is proud in his presumptuous planning. That's what's present here. You're saying this, you're planning that, you're going there, and so on. And what is absent in the section is any notion of the providence of God. The very phrase, the providence of God, is so alien to contemporary thinking that we have to go and look for somewhere to try and understand what is even meant by the phrase. And of course, you know the best place to go is to the Shorter Scottish Catechism, which is a great wealth of truth. And in the Shorter Catechism, we're told that the works of God's providence are His most holy, wise, and powerful preserving and governing all His creatures and all their actions. God preserves all His creatures. What does that mean? It means that according to the Bible, nothing in the whole universe would continue to exist for one slightest fraction of a second without God. The universe has real existence. Its continuity is not a mere semblance, but it does not exist independently of the continuous activity of its creator. So we're not, to quote Noel Harrison, the world is not like an apple spinning silently in space. And the answer to the question, what is your life, is not to be found in the borders of our minds, like the circles that you find in the borders of your mind. I don't want to belabor this, but I think some of you may be following me. And the striking emphasis which is given here, and this is not the totality of the answer to the question, what is your life? But it is the answer that James provides for us. What is your life, he says? Your life is very, very brief. In fact, when you think about it, he says you are a mist. How substantial is a mist? A mist is completely insubstantial. You can't grab the mist. Some mornings when you come here early in the morning, out over Grantwood Golf Course, there is a wonderful inversion, and you can see the super mist all over the fairways and up over those first couple of greens. You come in, you go about your business, even for an hour, you go back out and say, I must go out and see the mist, and there is no possibility ever of seeing it. It is gone. And even while it was there, it was insubstantial. If your children were to get out of the car and run up and try and grab hold of it, they couldn't grab hold of it. What is your life? Your life is a mist. It's insubstantial. It's a mist that appears for a little while. It's transient. It's ephemeral. And it vanishes. It goes without trace. Now, when we think of life in these terms, then it changes everything, doesn't it? And that's why most of the time in our lives, we don't think about these things. We don't want to think about these things. But the Bible continually confronts us with them. For example, in Psalm 90, the psalmist says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place through all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You are the everlasting one. And then listen to what he says. You turn men back to dust, saying, return to dust, O sons of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You sweep men away in the sleep of death. They're like the new grass of the morning, though in the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withered. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. The length of our days is 70 years, or 80, if we have the strength. That was written a long time ago. Have you checked the actuarial tables lately? Not a lot has changed, has it? Despite the advance of civilization, despite our sophistication, despite all the advances of medication, I would think most men here would say 70 would be a good innings. And if we push it to 80, then we will have occasion for thankfulness, hopefully, and hopefully those that we are still around will be equally thankful. What is your life? Your life is passing. How are we then to handle the fact of life's frailty? Well, one of the answers is, abandon yourself to the indulgence of all your lusts and all your passions. Eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you die. Grab the gusto. Get all the toys you can. The old bumper sticker expresses the philosophy well. He that dies, she that dies with the most toys wins. That's one of the answers. In the circle of life, what are we going to do? Through the journey of despair and hope and so on, we might as well grab what we can while we're going along. Last Sunday, when I began to quote from memory from this old song by Ray Stevens from 1968, I think it was, and everybody immediately went on the internet and got the song for me. Thank you to each of you who did. But I was trying to get to the verse that I couldn't remember, and maybe I wasn't supposed to remember it because it's perhaps a better verse for tonight than it was for last Sunday. But the verse that I was trying to get to was this: spending counterfeit incentive, wasting precious time and health, placing value on the worthless, disregarding priceless wealth. You can wheel and deal the best of them and steal it from the rest of them. You know the score. Their ethics are a bore. You better just take care of business, Mr. Businessman, while you can. James says to the businessman, hey, Mr. Businessman, you're a little presumptuous, aren't you? You are presuming not only on tomorrow, but on all of your tomorrows. Here, says James, is what that presumptuous person needs to do. First of all, he or she needs to face up to what they do not know. There's an irony in this, I'm sure. You who say, I want to speak to you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city and spend a year there, carry on business and make money. I sit in the airport and listen to men talking on their cell phones, women too, but mainly men. It's going to be one obnoxious day when cell phones are cut free on the airlines, because you're now going to be in 25B, sitting next to two guys, both talking out loud on their cell phones, and it's unthinkable. It's a nightmare coming. But a fellow said to me the other day, Thursday morning, I think it was, I was sitting by myself after Sue had left, and he said, is it okay if I sit here? Yes, I said, it's fine. Well, he no sooner sat down than he started to talk out loud. And he had the thing in his ear. At first I thought he'd lost his senses, and then I realized what he was doing. And my wife has been trying to teach me that if you whisper into your cell phone, you can still be heard at the other end of the line. I don't know whether I feel dumber whispering or speaking out loud, but nevertheless, this fellow had no interest in whispering in his phone. And I don't want to do him a disservice. He was just a fairly straightforward businessman. But essentially what he was doing was living in James 4:13. He was announcing to everyone about today and tomorrow and next year, and he ran the figures by them, and he cross-referenced them, and he pointed out what he was doing. And frankly, all I needed was his social security number, and I pretty well had this guy down for raps. But as I listened to him, I said, who does this guy think he is? He can't even put his socks on, apart from God's providence. He sounds as though he runs the universe, let alone runs his company. And then I said to myself, you know, you find it easy to see your sins in other people, don't you? See, what I dislike most in other people is usually what I hate most in myself, but it's easier to find it in someone else than to face it in me. This is not a peculiarly pagan problem. Christians do this as well. The sin of presumptuousness that forgets what it doesn't know. He says, you're planning next year? I've got news for you. You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Yeah, well, I have the year-end figures for you, and yeah, we've already done the projections for next year. Yeah, Joe's got that. Call Joe. You can get him. It sounds so grand, doesn't it? Just a little blood test. Just a significant amount of turbulence on the aircraft. And suddenly, all of our proud and presumptuous boasts are reaching for something. Either the 86-proof anesthetic crutch, or the relationship, or the dream. If you're going to tackle this question, he says you have to face up to what you do not know. You don't know about tomorrow. None of us do. Also, you have to face up to the fact of your frailty. We've addressed that, haven't we? What is your life? You're a mist. It appears for a wee while, and then it vanishes away. I think it was last week, it might have been the week before, I was teaching one of the girls in the office a poem. Not a great poem. In fact, I started to wander around the building saying it out loud. A number of people of my vintage said, oh, I haven't heard that in 100 years, which was hyperbole, but I understood what they meant. Do you remember this one? Solomon Grundy, born on Monday, christened on Tuesday, married on Wednesday, took ill on Thursday, worse on Friday, died on Saturday, buried on Sunday. And that was the end of Solomon Grundy. Now there's a nice little rhyme for your children, isn't it? Children in Scotland played games to that. They skipped rope to it. Solomon Grundy, born on Monday, christened on Tuesday. And then if the person tripped, they stopped it and they started again. Solomon Grundy, born on Monday. And then when they'd finished that, they held hands and they went around and around singing. The Scottish version is as follows. The American version is marginally different. You perfect everything, I understand that. Singing, ring a ring of roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. There's another nice one. Where did that come from? Came from the plague. And posies were held by the ladies to offset the stench. Now you might say to yourself, well, thank God we've moved on from those dreadful days when our children in their infancy and in their growing years were confronted by their mortality, were aware of the fact that they weren't spinning in the circle of life, but that they were actually purposefully created, that they did not exist before they were born, and that they were moving to a definite terminus in their life. And the same God who made them and fashioned them according to His wonderful plan was the same God who loved them in Jesus and longed to have a personal relationship with them. And within the framework of what they didn't know, and within the context of the frailty of life, then the gospel came to them. But it's hard to speak to people about eternity when they have embraced a philosophy which is the circle of life. Because first you have to argue for the linear nature of the passage of time, and so wean people away from the preoccupation that allows them to get through their days. But I'm going on a bit, so I'll take my final point and finish. James says if you're going to face up to the question, you need to face up to what you don't know. You don't know about tomorrow. You need to face up to your frailty, and also you need to face up to the fact that you're entirely dependent upon God. You see, in verse 14, it's the contents of tomorrow that we don't know. And in verse 15, it is that we don't know if there's a tomorrow. In verse 14, he says, you don't know what will happen tomorrow. In verse 15, he says, you better get used to saying, if it is the Lord's will, there will be a tomorrow, because if it isn't the Lord's will, there won't be a tomorrow. It's quite a thought, isn't it? Now, I don't know if you had this kind of terminology as growing up as children. And when I think back on it, it's amazing that I made my way through life, or I didn't lie in my bed worried out of my wits. But you remember the prayer. And now I lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. And if I die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. You know, so many things out of my childhood come back to me now that I move into my dotage. But I was thinking about this, because there was a lady who used to come to this church, and it infuriated her when I said that God spares us. She said, God doesn't spare us. Well, we chose to disagree with one another. But when we said good night to one another in our family, this was our parting shot. Good night, Dad. I will see you in the morning, all spared and well. I will see you in the morning, all spared and well. In other words, I will see you in the morning if God spares me and grants me health. Otherwise, I will not see you in the morning. You don't have to be a genius as a boy growing up to recognize what you're giving expression to in that kind of terminology. And tonight, contemporary American society resists the question, flees from the challenge that it brings, chooses not to think about these things at all. And surely the contemporary fascination with health is in large measure on account of the fact that contemporary society has no answer to death. I pulled off the internet, "All the world's a stage." It's a great quote, isn't it? You remember that? Jacques in As You Like It. The dentists love this. I'm going to dedicate this to all dentists because of the way it finishes. But you remember it, all the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. His acts being 7 ages. You know, the first instance is the wee guy and so on. It goes through, you know it. And then he says, and it ends up sans teeth, without eyes, without taste, without everything. Now, that's why in our funeral services here at Parkside, I think most of us eventually end up saying the same thing every time. We say to the people who have gathered, we're here today and there's some things we can't avoid. One is the fact of life's brevity. 2 is the fact of death's reality. 3 is the fact of judgment's certainty. And 4 is the fact of faith's opportunity. Tonight, you may be here, and this question has a very personal and a very private touch on your life. Because you've been asking the question, what is your life, and getting really rotten answers. And it may be completely unknown to the people around you. It may even be unknown to the people who are nearest and dearest to you. But that you feel yourself to be empty and left out. And there may even be things in your life that disgust you so badly that you hate to wake up in the night and have your conscience accuse you. And frankly, if you're honest, you think you're pretty worthless. Well, the Bible is full of good news for people who think themselves to be worthless. And the Bible says that men and women are the very pinnacle of God's creation. That God has made us in His image, that we are precious in His sight, that we possess a dignity that is unknown even by the angels. That image is marred because of man's sin. And that's why you feel the way you feel, and that's why people treat you as they treat you, and that's why you treat people as you do. But the good news is this, that the same God that made you has done something for you in Jesus, and He has done something in Jesus so as to put the pieces of your picture back together again. You may have been trying to fix it on the horizontal level. If I can bridge the gap with her, if I can re-engage with him, if I can do this. And those are all useful adventures. But the fact of the matter is the Bible says that first we have to deal with it on the vertical axis between ourselves and the God who has made us. Coming and meeting Him. Well, how can I meet Him? He seems so far away. It's as if His phone is off the hook. Well, the good news is we don't have to go and find Him. He is the one who comes to find us. And He has reached down to us in Jesus and offers to us forgiveness, dies to bear our punishment, dies to wipe clean our stain, offers us a whole new family, offers us a whole new future, so that we can then ask the question, what is my life? And we can say, my life is passing, that is without doubt. But my life is purchased. He purchased it. And my life is powerful. Powerful. The impact of a solitary life lived for good and lived for God. Only one life. It'll soon be past. And only what's done for Jesus will last.
This message was brought to you from Truth for Life, where the learning is for living. To learn more about Truth for Life with Alistair Begg, visit us online at truthforlife.org.